Outside, February. The ground still cold enough to see your breath. Frost on the grass every morning. The calendar says spring is weeks away, and every gardening guide ever written says you cannot start seeds outside right now. And yet, right there on the soil in the open air with no heating mat, no grow light, no climate-controlled seedling station, a tray of seeds is germinating, pushing green shoots upward through damp soil like it's the middle of May. Tomatoes, peppers, plants that are supposed to need warm, stable temperatures to even think about sprouting. Doing exactly that. In winter, outside, under nothing more than a clear plastic bottle cut in half and pressed into the dirt. No electricity, no thermostat, no special equipment. A bottle that cost nothing because it came with water already inside it. And the person who set this up paid $0 for the greenhouse effect it's creating. This technique is called a cloche, and in its plastic bottle form, the version that anyone can make in 30 seconds from recycling. It is one of the most effective, most scalable, and most completely ignored seed-starting tools in all of home gardening. You cut a 2-liter bottle in half. You press the bottom half into the soil around your seed. The plastic traps warmth, holds humidity, blocks wind, and creates a microclimate around that seed that is consistently warmer and more stable than the surrounding air, sometimes by as much as 8 to 10 degrees Celsius. That difference is enough to push germination weeks earlier than the season would otherwise allow. That difference is enough to protect a young seedling from a late frost that kills everything around it. That difference is the entire reason commercial greenhouses exist, and you are replicating it with a bottle from your recycling bin. The cloche is not a new idea dressed in modern plastic. The concept has been validated by professional horticulturalists, agricultural researchers, and extensioning services on every continent where food is grown in variable climates. The Royal Horticultural Society in the United Kingdom formally recommends cloche use for season extension in home gardens. Research published in horticultural science journals has documented germination rate improvements of 30 to 50% in cloched versus uncloched seed starts in cool conditions, and growth acceleration across the first 4 to 6 weeks of a seedling's life that compounds into meaningfully earlier harvests. Market gardeners in France have used glass cloches commercially since the 17th century, producing out-of-season vegetables for Parisian markets when no competing supply existed, creating enormous economic advantage through microclimate control that their competitors couldn't replicate without the same infrastructure. The principle has been proven in glass, in plastic, in row cover fabric, in polytunnel systems worth thousands of dollars, and at the cheapest possible end of that spectrum, requiring the least possible material and the least possible effort, sits the plastic bottle, doing the same job as a greenhouse for free. Now ask yourself why nobody at the garden center has ever mentioned this to you. Why the seed packet in your hand has a planting calendar on the back, but no note saying, or just use a bottle cloche and start 3 weeks early? Why the gardening shows and YouTube channels and magazine features about seed, starting overwhelmingly show heating mats, grow light setups, germination stations, and climate-controlled indoor propagation systems, all of which cost money, all of which require purchasing, and none of which are necessary for a significant portion of what people are trying to grow. The seed starting equipment market is substantial. Heating mats run $20 to $50 each. Full-spectrum grow lights run $50 to $200. Propagation trays, humidity domes, thermometers, timers, seedling fertilizers. The ecosystem of products built around the idea that starting seeds early requires investment is enormous and well-marketed. A plastic bottle cloche costs nothing, requires no electricity, works outdoors where it belongs, and produces germination and early growth results that match or exceed indoor heated setups for cold hardy and moderately cold sensitive crops. The industry doesn't highlight it because highlighting it costs them customers. So instead, the knowledge lives in old gardening books, in the practice of experienced kitchen gardeners who've been doing it for decades quietly, and in the habits of subsistence farmers in developing countries who never had the option of buying a heating mat and figured out the bottle long before anyone thought to sell them a product. You felt this effect before without naming it? On a cold morning, get into a car that's been parked in the sun. The outside temperature is 7 degrees Celsius. Inside the car, it's 25. The glass trapped the sun's radiant heat and prevented the wind from carrying it away. That's a greenhouse. Your windshield is a greenhouse. Now shrink that principle down to the size of a plastic bottle placed over a single seed, and you have a microclimate so effective that professional growers have spent centuries and enormous amounts of money trying to replicate it at scale. The bottle is just a very small car window placed directly over the most vulnerable and heat-dependent moment in a plant's entire life. The seed doesn't know it's in a recycled container. It just knows the temperature is right and the humidity is stable and something is blocking the wind. And it does what seeds do when conditions are favorable. It grows. Here's how the physics works, because understanding it makes you a better gardener for life. Sunlight passes through clear plastic, essentially the same way it passes through glass. The short wavelength radiation comes in freely. Once inside the bottle's enclosed space, that radiation warms the soil and the air. When the warmed surface radiates heat back outward, it does so at longer wavelengths, infrared, and those longer waves are partially trapped by the plastic rather than escaping freely. This is exactly what happens in the atmosphere when carbon dioxide traps heat, and it's exactly what happens in every greenhouse ever built. The plastic also physically blocks wind, which is significant because wind is one of the primary mechanisms by which young seedlings lose moisture and experience temperature stress. Inside the bottle, the air is still. The humidity builds from the moisture in the soil and from the seed's own respiration. The combination of trapped heat, trapped humidity, and eliminated wind creates conditions that are measurably more favorable for germination and early growth than even moderately cold outdoor conditions, sometimes dramatically so. And the effect is strongest at the times when it matters most, at night and in early morning when outside temperatures drop and the thermal mass of the warm soil inside the cloche continues radiating heat into the small enclosed space, keeping the microclimate stable through the coldest hours. Here's how you build it and deploy it. Take a clean, clear 2-liter plastic bottle, transparent, not tinted. Remove the cap and set it aside. You'll use it later. Using scissors or a knife, cut the bottle roughly in half. The bottom half becomes your cloche. The top half can be composted, reused. For a second cloche at smaller scale, or used as a mini funnel for watering into tight spaces. Prepare your planting site with loose and rich soil. Dig a small area, add compost if you have it, and create a fine crumble textured surface that seeds can make contact with easily. Plant your seed at the depth specified for its variety. This hasn't changed. Press the bottom half of the bottle firmly into the soil around the planting site, pushing the cut rim about 2 centimeters into the ground, to prevent wind from lifting it and to create a better seal with the soil surface. Leave the bottle cap off initially. This allows some air circulation during the warmest parts of the day and prevents the temperature inside from exceeding what seedlings can tolerate on unexpectedly warm spring days. On nights when frost is forecast, replace the cap to fully seal the cloche and maximize heat retention through the coldest hours. That's the complete system. Soil prepared, seed planted, bottle pressed in, cap on or off depending on conditions. The microclimate does the rest. Check moisture every 2 to 3 days. The soil inside a cloche dries more slowly than exposed soil, but it does still dry. Water gently through the open top using a small watering can or a bottle with holes in the cap without disturbing the soil surface. When the seedling has developed its first true leaves and outside temperatures are consistently above the minimum for that crop, remove the cloche gradually, first leaving it off during the day for several days to harden the seedling to outdoor conditions, then removing it entirely. Here is what most people get wrong when they first try this because the mistakes are simple and common and completely avoidable. First mistake, using tinted or opaque bottles. Green bottles, blue bottles, brown bottles, they filter or block the sunlight that powers the system. You need clear, transparent plastic. The clearer, the better. If you can't see clearly through, the plastic, when you hold it up to the sky, it will underperform significantly compared to clear bottles. Second mistake, pushing the bottle too firmly into hard, compacted soil and creating a perfect airtight seal at the base. A small amount of air exchange at the soil level is beneficial. It prevents the buildup of fungal conditions that thrive in completely stagnant, high humidity environments. You want the bottle pressed in firmly enough to stay put in wind, but not so perfectly sealed that no air movement occurs at all. Third mistake, leaving the cap on during warm, sunny spring days. On a sunny day with an outside temperature of 15 degrees Celsius, the inside of a sealed cloche can reach 40 degrees or more, enough to cook seedlings in their most vulnerable stage. Monitor conditions when you set these up. Warm days require the cap off or a small ventilation hole drilled in the cap to prevent heat buildup. Fourth mistake, removing the cloche too suddenly when the seedling looks ready. Seedlings grown under cloche protection have developed in a stable, protected microclimate. Sudden exposure to full outdoor conditions, wind, temperature fluctuation, low humidity, stresses them severely and often sets their growth back by weeks. The hardening process, gradually increasing exposure over 5 to 7 days, is not optional. It's the transition period that determines whether your early start translates into an early harvest. Fifth mistake, only using one. A single cloche over a single seed is a fine experiment. 20 cloches over 20 seeds is a functional season extension system. The scalability is immediate and costs nothing. Every bottle in your recycling bin is a potential cloche. The people who get the most value from this method are the ones who collect bottles for 2 weeks before the planting season and deploy them across an entire bed at once. The results documented by market gardeners and home growers who systematically use plastic bottle cloches are consistent and significant. In cool, temperate climates with typical spring conditions, cloched seeds germinate 1 to 3 weeks earlier than uncloched seeds of the same variety planted at the same time. Seedlings under cloches show faster early growth, stronger root development, and less transplant shock when the cloche is removed because they've had more total growing time in favorable conditions. Market gardeners in the UK using cloche systems, both glass and plastic, routinely bring crops to harvest 2 to 4 weeks earlier than the standard season calendar suggests, which in direct market sale contexts translates to premium pricing because they're selling produce before anyone else has it. In home growing contexts, 2 to 4 weeks earlier means earlier food, longer production windows, and the ability to fit an additional crop cycle into the season before first frost, which in practical terms means meaningfully more total food from the same space. And the scaling math is simple. 10 bottles is 10 plants with extended season. 50 bottles is a full garden bed. 200 bottles collected over winter at zero cost is a serious small-scale market garden setup that costs nothing for its most fundamental infrastructure. The safety concerns are minimal and the objections are mostly aesthetic. Is plastic safe in contact with soil that grows food? Clear PT plastic, the material used in standard beverage bottles, is considered stable and does not leach meaningful compounds into soil under normal garden conditions. It is not in contact with the food itself, only with the soil around the seedling. For those with concerns about any plastic contact, traditional terracotta or glass cloches made from bell-shaped jars are available and function identically. They just cost more. Does rain collect inside the cloche and drown seedlings? With the cap removed, moderate rain can enter and supplement irrigation, which is often beneficial. In very heavy rain conditions, temporarily replacing the cap and allowing the rain to pass before reopening prevents waterlogging. Is there any benefit to using colored bottles, clear, green, or blue, for specific crops? Marginal effects have been studied, with some evidence that certain wavelengths of filtered light affect growth patterns in specific crops. But for general seed starting purposes, clear bottles outperform all filtered options at the germination and early growth stages. Start with clear. The cloche goes back to ancient Rome, where wealthy landowners used sheets of thin, transparent stone, a translucent form of gypsum called lapis specularis, to cover planting beds and force early growth of vegetables for the imperial table. The Roman Emperor Tiberius is documented to have required a daily supply of cucumbers regardless of season, which his gardeners produced using primitive forcing frames covered with specularia, the ancient world's version of a greenhouse panel. In 17th century France, market gardeners outside Paris perfected the glass bell cloche, the cloche de jardinage, into a commercial tool that allowed them to supply fresh vegetables to urban markets through months when no other supply existed, creating significant economic advantage and feeding a city through winter. In 19th century England, bell glass cloches became standard equipment in the kitchen gardens of country estates, where head gardeners competed to produce the first strawberries, the first melons, the first tomatoes of the season, a social and culinary competition that drove the refinement of cloche technique to a high art. None of those gardeners had plastic bottles, but they understood exactly the same principle that a clear bottle demonstrates in 30 seconds on a cold morning. Trap the heat, block the wind, give the seed what it needs to believe it is already summer, and that's where this all lands. We live in a world where starting seeds early requires, according to the market, a heated propagation station, a set of full-spectrum grow lights, a thermostatic controller, and a suite of accessories, all of it purchased, all of it consuming electricity, all of it replaceable every few seasons. And a clear plastic bottle pressed into the soil delivers the same germination acceleration and early growth protection using nothing but sunlight and the basic physics of trapped air. The knowledge gap between what you were told you needed and what actually works is not a gap filled by technology. It's a gap filled by things for sale. Every spring, millions of people delay their gardens by weeks because they don't have the right equipment, not knowing that the right equipment is in their recycling bin right now, not knowing that the same principle that built the glass houses of Versailles works equally well with materials that cost exactly nothing. That's not a gardening problem. That's an information problem. And information problems have simple solutions. If this video made you look at the plastic bottle in your hand differently, if it made you want to cut it in half tonight and press it into a patch of soil and start something growing weeks before the season says you're allowed to, then share it with someone whose garden always starts too late. Because the greenhouse was never the building. It was always just the idea inside it.